Hi guys, so as a starting point, if any of you have time to subscribe to my second channel, Tales of Tragedy, I'd appreciate that. There'll be a link in the description. Secondly, this is a case I've been desperate to cover for a while, because it's so bizarre, with so many twists and turns. I was waiting for it to be resolved, but as I get to in the video, it's likely to drag on for years. So I'll cover what's happened so far, and it's wild. Seriously, buckle up for this one. Anyway, on with the video. Nicholas Rossi is an American serial rapist, career criminal, domestic abuser, fraudster, and as pure an example of a narcissist I think I've covered on this channel, who in January 2020, whilst wanted by US authorities for a string of crimes, announced that he had terminal cancer. A month later, his widow, who claimed her name was Louise, said that he was dead and relayed this information to media outlets in his home city of Providence, Rhode Island. However, almost 2 years later, and 3,000 miles away, a man suffering from COVID was admitted to a hospital in Glasgow, Scotland. His fingerprints and tattoos matched those of Nicholas Rossi, but this man said that he was Arthur Knight, an Irish orphan who'd never been to America. He was married to a woman called Miranda Knight, who parroted her husband's claims, and they appeared on camera in bizarre and unintentionally hilarious interviews, with Rossi sitting in a wheelchair despite being able to walk, and using an oxygen mask he didn't need. He used these media appearances to play the victim and claim that this was a case of mistaken identity, as shown by this clip.
And I would like to go back to being a normal husband. But I can't, because I can't breathe, I can't walk. People say that's an act. Let me try to stand up. Let me try to stand up. Exactly, exactly.
What happened next was a bizarre 2-year fight to prove Arthur Knight and Nicholas Rossi were the same person and extradite him to America to face justice, including 2 rapes which he'd committed over a decade before, which was part of a horrifying pattern of violence against women that crisscrossed the United States and extended to the shores of the UK. Welcome to Evil Among Us. As a starting point, I need to say that Nicholas Rossi is a man who used at least 13 different aliases throughout his life. In order to tell his story, I'll use some of these names, including Nicholas Rossi, Nicholas Alverdian, and Arthur Knight, depending on what I'm discussing, but they're all the same person. His purpose for doing this was to cause confusion, but I want to lessen this for you guys. Nicholas Rossi is the name which appears most frequently in news articles, so I'll use that one predominantly. He was actually born Nicholas Alverdian on July the 11th, 1987, in Providence, the capital of Rhode Island, the smallest state in the United States, which lies in the northeast of the country. His parents were Diana and Jack Alverdian. The disturbed man that Nicholas Rossi became is firmly rooted in a dysfunctional and horrific childhood. Rossi has claimed that his father was a psychopath who would regularly beat his wife and killed the family dog in front of the children, of which there were 3, including 2 younger siblings, Joseph and Deandra. As will become clear, it's impossible to take much of what Rossi says seriously. He's a compulsive liar, so we have to turn to other sources to verify his statements. With regards to his claims about Jack, they actually seem true. Jack was a career criminal, an extremely violent man. He had convictions for writing bad checks, obtaining money by deception, selling cocaine, domestic violence against multiple women, and breaching protective orders, including against Diana. In 2001, a motorist saw Jack dragging a woman by her hair into a mobile home screaming. They called the police, and when they arrived, they were confronted with a battered and bloodied woman who identified herself as Jack's girlfriend. She also disclosed that he'd beaten her before this incident. This woman sought a restraining order, adding to the long list of women that Jack Alverdian had abused, and then had to be barred by the court from contacting. This was long after Jack and Diana divorced in 1990, and it appears that he floated in and out of his children's lives, in between spending time in mental health hospitals or jail. The influence of Jack on his son's development can be seen in the parallels in their offending. Clearly, Jack taught his children that others were merely there to use and abuse, and rules didn't apply to them. By 1994, when Rossi was just 7 years old, he was uncontrollable. In fact, all of the children were. This was the year that Diana, who worked as a waitress and in nightclubs, met a man called David Rossi, who was a renowned Engelbert Humperdinck impersonator. For those scratching their heads, Engelbert is a British singer who has had a career spanning almost 70 years, and who was especially big in the UK and the US in the 1960s and 1970s. Anyway, there was an instant attraction between David and Diana, and they began dating. Diana was reluctant to introduce David to the children because they were out of control. He believed she was exaggerating, but when he met them, he actually found that she played down the situation. He later stated, quote, "They destroyed my house, ripping things off the walls, throwing things out of the refrigerator. My first impression of Nicky was he had mental problems. It just got worse with every day. He would urinate in his brother's bed just to get his brother in trouble, jump out of windows and run away in his underwear. Diana said this is why you don't get involved, but I stuck with it. I felt they needed a father." In addition to this, Rossi would smear feces on the walls. He clearly wanted to destroy and was completely defiant. He would act in any way simply to break rules, even if by doing so it would be detrimental to his own life. He was also a pathological liar and would lie about everything and anything, even if, again, it actually caused issues for him in the long run. David stuck with Diana and they married in West Valley Inn near Providence in 1996, but Rossi's behaviour continued and became worse as the years went on. David later reported, quote, "He just wouldn't listen in school. He hit the mother, hit the grandmother all the time, hit his siblings. I used to have to hold him down and he'd be spitting at me." When he was around 10 years old, Rossi was committed to mental health facilities, firstly Butler Hospital and then Bradley Hospital, a specialist paediatric facility. Here he was diagnosed with PTSD and ADHD. He was also noted as showing traits of narcissistic personality disorder, or MPD. MPD is a mental health condition I've covered numerous times on this channel. The number of symptoms and intensity experienced by someone with MPD varies depending on the intensity of this condition. These symptoms can include having an unreasonably high sense of self-importance and requiring constant excessive admiration, expecting to be recognised as superior even without achievement, believing they are superior to others and can only spend time with or be understood by equally special people, with them looking down on those they consider unimportant, exploiting, victimising, manipulating and abusing others, including their closest associates, for example friends and family, in order to get what they want. This is often accompanied by pathological lying and underpinned by a lack of empathy for others, becoming impatient or angry when they don't receive special recognition or treatment, and lastly, reacting with rage or contempt and trying to belittle other people to make themselves appear superior. As you will see, Nicholas Rossi ticks all of these boxes and is clearly an example of a severe case of MPD. However, this is not what made Rossi so dangerous. It was the fact that he was intelligent, cunning and charming. He was a practiced manipulator from a young age and had aspirations of being someone in the world, regardless of what he had to do to achieve this and who he had to destroy to get there. As a child, he said he was going to be on the cover of Forbes one day. Rossi returned to the family home after psychiatric care, but his behaviour continued. It was during a family holiday to Disney World, Florida in 1999 that David finally snapped. During the trip, Rossi, aged 12 by this point, was causing terror to the family and other guests, pushing in line and telling people to fuck off. He began to hit his mother, and David then beat up his stepson. He later recalled, quote, "I hit him so hard, I broke his nose, I broke his jaw. Was I proud of it? No, but I couldn't take no more." David was arrested and charged with assault, but this was dropped when evidence regarding Rossi's behaviour was presented to the court. David and Diana separated soon after this. I want to play you a short clip of David recently speaking about his former stepson, and he doesn't mince his words.
What was your first impression of Nicky?
That he had mental problems. Really, yes.
Even at how old were you then at the time?
Maybe he was 8. He just got worse. So every day there was something with him. He would urinate on his brother's bed just to get the brother in trouble. Yeah. Jump out windows, run away in his underwear. I said, Diane, he needs mental help. There's a hospital in Providence called Butler. They'll help him. They couldn't handle him. They threw him out. They threw him out.
What did he do that made him throw him out?
Another kid, not listening, urinating on beds, wiping feces on the wall. He was just unbelievable. Like I said, he's the devil's spawn.
Just before Christmas 1999, Nicholas Rossi was taken into foster care and spent the majority of his remaining childhood in the care of Rhode Island's Department of Children, Youth and Families, or DCYF. Rossi was bounced from care home to care home, and during this time, he claimed to have been the victim of physical and sexual abuse. He began writing letters and rubbing shoulders with politicians in the state who believed his heartbreaking tales, and while still a teenager, he began advocating for the rights of other children in care, stating that the DCYF was broken. He was given a job in the Rhode Island House of Representatives at the age of just 14 years old, with his role being to inform lawmakers about his negative experiences in care, which would allow them to shape reforms. To be clear, Nicholas Rossi didn't give two shits about children in care. If they'd had any money, he would have robbed them of it. It was about being in the halls of power, having the influence of politicians, and therefore making himself feel more important. It also gave him an opportunity to manipulate and blackmail people into handing over money. One of the politicians who he crossed paths with was Brian G. Coogan, who, at the time of meeting Rossi in around 2000 or early 2001, was representing Rhode Island's 64th district. The pair became close, and soon after, Brian and his wife agreed to give in to Rossi's requests to be formally adopted. It got as far as the court hearing to formalise the adoption, but the judge actually stepped in and warned Brian of what he was potentially getting himself into. The judge told Brian that the authorities didn't have any information to corroborate Rossi's claims, and in fact, it appeared he was the abuser, not the victim whilst in care. The judge specifically said to Brian, quote, "There's something really wrong with that kid. He will try to undermine you and turn your family upside down." Brian himself heard Rossi threatening a social worker, with him telling them if they didn't do what he said, he would accuse them of sexual abuse. This was a repeating pattern with Rossi, with Brian stating, quote, "The kid swindled a lot of people. He got certain reps to give him money, and sometimes he threatened them. He knew how to play the 'you touched me' card. He'd say, 'I'll tell people you raped me, you assaulted me.'" When Brian Coogan changed his mind, the mask fell away and Rossi turned on him. Rossi bounced between care placements, including ones in Rhode Island, Nebraska, and Florida, until 2005 when he was 18 years old, at which point he was discharged from the responsibility of DCYF. Up to this point, everything I've spoken about occurred when Nicholas Rossi was a child, and it's clear he was already an incredibly manipulative, deceptive, vindictive and vicious predator. When he became an adult, the floodgates appeared to open, and the true evil of Nicholas Rossi was revealed through engaging in a crime spree of staggering proportions, which would not only crisscross the United States, but also span continents, with him physically, emotionally, and sexually abusing multiple women. Moving forward, I'm going to focus predominantly on Nicholas Rossi's violent and sexual crimes. However, keep in mind, he continued to scam and con people in person and online throughout this time, and I'll mention some of these offences where relevant. So how many women Nicholas Rossi has abused and raped is not known, and likely never will be. His childhood had made him used to moving around, and he crisscrossed the United States, settling in one area before causing chaos and then moving on, so the true extent of his crimes is difficult to quantify. It seems that some of these moves were linked to him following previous foster parents, but it seems that generally he knew that committing crimes across the breadth of the United States would make it more difficult to link him to his offences and stop him. As we go along, I'll number the women he's victimised so you can see the true extent of his offending. So recently, a woman has come forward indicating that Rossi's campaign of sexual violence against women began in 2007 when he was 19 years old. During this year, a woman, who's referred to by the pseudonym Samantha in media reports, received an email from Rossi which contained a fake Harvard acceptance letter that he had quote-unquote accidentally sent to her. It's not clear whether the pair knew each other, but they were both from Providence, although Samantha was located in a dorm room at her college in Massachusetts at the time, which is one of the states adjacent to Rhode Island. This fake letter had the desired effect. It led to contact between Samantha and Rossi, and he used his superficial charm to his full advantage to get her to agree to go on a date with him. Rossi travelled interstate by train and met with Samantha, and she recalled, quote, Everything just seemed so perfect. He was super gentlemanly and very well spoken, and super kind and everything like that. He was fun to talk to. I know now that everything he did was incredibly scripted and out of a playbook. We then went to dinner and back to Samantha's dorm room to watch a film together. It was here that Rossi began to change. Samantha stated, quote, "He kept pressuring me for sex, saying things like, 'Oh, I just spent so long on the train,' just like guilting me basically, and I was just trying to play it off. I said no, I refused. I was like, I don't want to do this, and he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't let it go. It got to the point where I was sick of hearing it from him. Then I very specifically remember he threatened me. He said something like, 'You're going to regret it if you don't.' I was like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, but I don't want to find out what it means." Rossi then pinned Samantha down and raped her. The next morning, she was in shock and was desperate to get Rossi out of her room. She even agreed to give him a lift back to Providence, and they stopped us to drive through on the way. Samantha has said, quote, "I remember thinking, how fucked up is it that I'm buying my rapist breakfast right now?" She felt that she wouldn't be believed if she went to the police, and after sending Rossi a message saying that he'd raped her, she blocked him from contacting her again. Soon after this incident, Nicholas Rossi moved to Ohio with a couple which included Sharon Lane and her husband, who became de facto foster parents to him, supporting this young man whilst he found his place in the world. They were originally from Providence, and it's here where they'd met Rossi several years before. Rossi would later repay their hospitality by taking out 22 fake credit cards in the couple's names and racking up $200,000 in debt. In January 2008, when Nicholas Rossi was 20 years old, he was studying at Sinclair Community College in Dayton. Also a student there was Mary Grabinski. Clearly Rossi was using the campus to find victims and selected Mary, and he reached out to her via MySpace. Mary had a boyfriend, and she made this clear, but said that she was open to making new friends. The pair agreed to meet at a cafeteria, and after a brief meeting, Rossi offered to walk Mary to class. When there was no one around, she stated, quote, "He pinned me up against a wall and put his hands down my pants. I said, 'Please stop. Can I please leave? Let me leave.' But he starts touching himself and unzipped his pants. He said, 'Shut up, bitch, I'm almost done,' and then ejaculated on the wall behind me. I was 19. Mary managed to escape and bumped into her attacker later that day. He was begging her not to report him to the police and giving the most feeble excuses. Mary remembers, quote, "He said, 'I'm sorry, you are beautiful, I couldn't help myself.'" Despite Rossi's pleas, Mary did go to the police, and he was arrested, convicted of sexual imposition and public indecency, and placed on the sex offenders register for 15 years. As if Nicholas Rossi's behaviour was not evil enough, he tried to sue Mary twice, in 2009 and 2013. Both suits were based on Rossi's claims that Mary had damaged his reputation and caused him emotional distress and humiliation. In the 2013 case, he presented a post on MySpace in court as evidence, which was entitled, "I'm a drunky bitch," which was supposedly written by Mary to her boyfriend at the time of the assault, claiming that she'd made up the allegations because she didn't want to admit that she'd cheated and jeopardised their relationship. This was proven to be a fake post created by Rossi. The cases were thrown out, but the trauma that Mary felt was drawn out for years. Things got worse. In 2014, this sick monster wrote a deranged essay entitled "My Personal 9/11", in which he castigated Mary and equated her reporting him for sexual assault to the worst terrorist atrocity on American soil. Part of this read, quote, "I am the victim and Mary Grabinski is the perpetrator. I am victimised every day of my life. I have spent the majority of that life trying to make the world a better place, lobbying for foster care reform, universal health care, educational system improvements, and other causes. My life has effectively been ended by Mary's evil act of terror." Mary's bravery would actually lead to the downfall of Nicholas Rossi, as his DNA was taken as part of his arrest for her assault. This would help link him to a further rape, which occurred just months after Mary's ordeal. This was one of two they committed before the end of the year. The first of these occurred in September 2008. By this point, Rossi had scurried across the country and was living in the state of Utah in the western United States. The victim was a 21-year-old woman who has not been identified yet, but we'll call her Kate. Kate and Rossi had met online and dated for a few weeks. However, he'd beaten her from day one and had borrowed money from her. On September the 13th, Rossi lured Kate to his apartment in the city of Orem on the pretense of paying her back the money he owed. He locked her in the property and raped her. Kate was only able to escape when Rossi was distracted. She then went to the hospital and spoke to the police to report the offence. A sexual assault kit was completed as part of her examination. In either November or December 2008, Rossi was dating a 26-year-old woman from Salt Lake City who we'll call Laura. She was again someone he met online, approaching her via MySpace. The relationship moved quickly, with the pair buying wedding rings within the first few weeks. They then had a violent argument at a shopping centre, and Laura fled to her car and locked the door, with Rossi hammering on the window. He then threatened Laura, saying if she didn't open the door, he would call the police and accuse her of assaulting him. Laura opened the door, and when they returned back to his apartment, he raped her. She would not report her ordeal to the police until years later. Nicholas Rossi returned to Rhode Island in 2009 when he was 22 years old. Within months, he began dating Kimberly, who, within weeks, had broken the relationship off and was then stalked by Rossi. She went to the police to make a report, stating that he'd bombarded her with messages, including calling her a psycho bitch. Between July 2010 and May 2011, 4 women filed complaints about Rossi, all citing abusive behaviour. One of these, Stephanie, stated that Rossi had forced her to withdraw money to pay him back for a dinner he'd bought her because she refused to have sex with him. She was then forced into being recorded, saying that she, quote, could not pursue legal action, and that the money she gave him was for therapy for him due to her violent actions and her sexual addiction. However, in amongst these women, Rossi got married on the 5th of November 2010. Not much is known about this woman, who we'll call Chloe, but the marriage only lasted 6 months, with her filing for divorce in May 2011. Chloe then went to the courts to get a restraining order against Rossi, citing violent and abusive behaviour, and she also reported that he was stalking her. It's important to point out there's clear crossover in Rossi's relationships, if you can even call them that. He was likely in multiple relationships at any given time, abusing multiple women whilst also looking for his next victim. Despite having a criminal record, being a registered sex offender, and having multiple complaints logged with the police about his behaviour, Rossi went back to trying to influence policy regarding the treatment of children in Rhode Island's care system. He would frequently speak to committees and continue to rub shoulders with influential politicians. In 2011, aged 23, Nicholas Rossi brought a civil suit against Rhode Island's Department of Children, Youth and Families, claiming that he'd suffered years of abuse whilst in state care. He represented himself, which gave him further attention and recognition which he desperately craved. In 2013, the suit was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum that is believed to have been in the region of $70,000. Rossi began living the high life, driving around everywhere in limousines and paying enormous restaurant bills for his friends. Rossi was in a relationship around this time with Philippa and had been bragging about his stepfather's role as an Engelbert Humperdinck impersonator, and he thought an introduction would impress his partner. This was David Rossi, and the pair had barely spoken over the last 10 years, but he agreed to meet for dinner in an upmarket restaurant in Providence. David later recalled that when his former stepson went to the bathroom, Philippa turned to him and said, quote, "Mr. Rossi, please help me." He responded, "What's the matter, sweetheart?" He claimed that Philippa then said that she was trapped in an abusive relationship with Nicholas Rossi and couldn't get out. David said that when Rossi returned from the bathroom, he said, quote, "If you touch this girl again, I'll beat the shit out of you." This was the last interaction the pair had. In early 2015, Rossi was again back in the state of Ohio and met a woman through the church called Catherine Heckendam. The pair entered into a relationship which moved quickly, and by October 2015, they were married. The marriage only lasted 7 months, and during that time, Catherine was subjected to constant abuse, some of which she recorded. Here's a clip of her talking about the trauma she experienced, which includes recordings of Rossi abusing her.
I felt very robbed. I always wanted, my dad to walk me down the aisle in a white dress, to be a celebration with family and friends, to then be able to go on a honeymoon and just really feel that love. Then we went home being Nick's house before our marriage. Something in him just changed. Now we're married. He believes he has me, and he can treat me however he wants. Stop!
I'm sorry.
You so shit, you are!
Ow!
Ow! Ow! Fuck you! You let me out!
I'm sorry for yelling.
Then let me out! Nick thrived off controlling me. He took my phone and locked me in the bathroom. The longest time was about 2 days. I did not have food, just running water. There were so many times where it would get physical. I had a black eye, a knife to my throat. I didn't even feel safe in our own bed. He took control there too.
In subsequent interviews, Catherine has stated that she was raped repeatedly by Rossi. She's also reported a detail which shows how prolific and predatory this man was. She stated, quote, "When he was out, I was down in the basement trying to clean up, and I found he had a bunch of boxes. There was a ton of journals written by Nick. It looked like they had different entries from different universities across the states. I remember one from Idaho. It said the girl's name, her class schedule, her likes and dislikes. It also said, she has a boyfriend who doesn't like me. Don't approach her when she's with her boyfriend. It was very creepy. There were probably about 15 to 20, all full of women's details. I only looked at about 4 of them. That was enough. I keep waiting for some of these women to come forward. I think he was using these journals to try to see if he could spark a romantic relationship with them. If they had money, even better. It was just a way to find his next victim." Catherine got a protective order, and Rossi continued to victimise her for the next 2 years, before the divorce was finalised in 2017. This included removing all the property from the house. Early in the relationship, Rossi borrowed $52,000 from Catherine to set up a community project, which went straight into his pocket, but which he never paid back. Catherine had to go through years of therapy to begin to come to terms with the trauma she suffered at the hands of Nicholas Rossi. Taking a break here, as well as stealing, likely north of $1 million, Rossi had abused at least 12 women in the space of around 10 years, raping 4 of them, and these are just the ones we know about. He had crisscrossed the United States, committing crimes in at least 4 states: Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Ohio, and Utah. All of this was before he'd reached his 30th birthday. This story would be terrible enough, even if at this point I said that this evil man was caught and sentenced, etc. But the saga of Nicholas Rossi is just getting started. In 2017, authorities in Utah began working their way through a backlog of untested sexual assault kits. DNA from one of these, from the rape of Kate on September the 13th, 2008, in the city of Orem, was found to match the DNA of Nicholas Rossi. An investigation was started, but it wasn't until 2020 that an arrest warrant was issued for him. But by the time this arrest warrant was issued, Nicholas Rossi was long gone. Authorities were later able to determine that he'd flown out of the US on an American Airlines flight bound for Dublin, Ireland on the 4th of June 2017. He then made his way to London and began looking for his next victim, a woman he could abuse, rape and control, who would provide him with bed and board and money. He went back to his tried and tested method of internet dating sites and social media, and it was here that he contacted a woman in her mid-30s called Michelle Minard. Michelle lived in Essex, a county in southeast England, and she was a single mother to a 10-year-old boy with special needs and a 7-year-old girl. Michelle invited Rossi to meet her, and he turned up with all of his belongings and moved himself in. As he'd done time and time again, the abuse began immediately. The relationship lasted only 5 weeks, and within days, Rossi was trying to control everything. He idolised Michelle's daughter, Unfortunately, it's clear why, as she would have been his next victim. With regards to her son, Rossi demanded that he be moved out of the house and into a care home because, quote, he'll never be able to contribute to society. He also stole Michelle's daughter's pocket money and tried to blame it on her son. When Michelle refused sex, she was raped. Eventually, Rossi fled, and Michelle went to Essex police and reported the rape, and that the man who committed it was named Nicholas Alverdian, the name he was using at the time. They began an investigation, but have been unable to find out whatever happened in this case. He has not been charged with this offence at the time of recording. Rossi then moved to Bristol. It should be pointed out that he was able to move so freely because he was still scamming people online, sometimes raking in tens of thousands of dollars from individuals and organisations. It was in Bristol that the persona of Arthur Knight emerged, where he met an important character in this story, Miranda Knight. Nicholas Rossi appears to have lived in Bristol, a city in southwest England, from approximately 2017 until May 2021. It was here in 2019 that he began dating a woman called Miranda Knight. It's important to point out that by this point he was going by the name Arthur Knight, or to give him his full title, Dr. Nicholas Arthur Timothy Knight Brown, but he shortened this. Doctor of what? Who knows? Rossi claimed to various people, in his fake British accent, that he was educated at Cambridge, Harvard and Princeton, and that he lectured at Bristol University. I'll use the name Knight occasionally moving forward, but if it's not obvious by now, this is indeed Nicholas Rossi. Miranda Knight is an enigma, and her role in this case is still unclear. Specifically, how much did this woman know, and how complicit was she in what happened next? There's almost no information on Miranda, but those who knew her have come forward to comment. From this, it appears she was a mosaic artist who exhibited her work at galleries and craft fairs around the west of England. She studied art at both the University of Portsmouth and the Southampton Institute for Fashion Design. She was a free spirit who apparently offered prospective clients colour your castle and colour your wardrobe consultations, as well as colour x-rays to discover your inner colour consciousness. A defunct website had pictures showing her unique fashion sense and included statements such as, quote, I believe in harnessing the power of colour to energise or calm, ground or uplift, and shape the quality of life. Miranda was also a devout Roman Catholic, and at least one friend has said that she was quite lonely and was somewhat naive, a person likely to be taken advantage of by others. At the time that she began dating Rossi, she was apparently working in B&Q, advising customers on paint colour schemes. It's clear that Miranda has lied repeatedly to the media, police and the courts. The only question is why, which is something we'll circle back to later. Miranda claimed in one interview that she and Arthur Knight met at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London in 2012 when they struck up a conversation about art. However, she was apparently in a relationship at that time, but when they met up again in Bristol in 2019 through the church, she was then in a position where they could date. Whether any of this history is true is unknown. The pair began dating and they married only months later on the 22nd of February 2020 at St Nicholas Church in Whitchurch, Bristol. It was a very strange affair. There was almost no one there, and specifically no friends or family of Knight. This is because, according to Miranda, Arthur Knight had told her that he had no family because he was an Irish-born orphan. It's important to highlight the timeline of their relationship and to point out at this early stage that Miranda has repeatedly stated that her husband is Arthur Knight and not Nicholas Rossi, and that she had no involvement in helping the latter escape justice. Whilst the pair were dating, over the Atlantic, the FBI were looking for Nicholas Rossi, not because of any violent or sexual acts against women, but because of him defrauding Sharon Lane and her husband, the couple in Ohio who had taken him in after he left the care system, and who he defrauded to the tune of $200,000. How Rossi knew that the FBI were searching for him is unclear, but regardless, he had no intention of facing justice and decided he needed to disappear for good. In January 2020, Nicholas Rossi reached out to a number of media outlets in Providence, insisting that they report that he was now terminally ill with cancer. He claimed he was living in Ireland, when in reality he was living in Bristol. The media were also contacted by a woman who claimed to be Rossi's wife and called herself Louise. Nicholas Rossi was claimed to have died on February the 29th, 2020, and this information was relayed via a number of phone calls and emails from his now widow Louise. When the Providence Journal asked for proof in the form of a death certificate, she refused to provide this. An obituary appeared online memorialising Rossi shortly after his death, and I think you can tell who wrote it. It begins, quote, "Nicholas Alverdian's battle for life ended on February the 29th, 2020. The children and families in the care of the Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth and Families, for whom he inspired and led through turbulent government transgressions, have lost a warrior that fought on the front lines for 2 decades. Further on it said, at the bedside were Mrs. Alverdian, their 2 children and extended family. His last words were, "Fear not, and run towards the bliss of the sun." At the time of his passing, the room was filled with the sounds of the end credits for the 1997 film Contact by composer Alan Silvestri, a film and score which held special meaning for Mr. Alverdian. Mr. Alverdian was a devout Roman Catholic. In keeping with Mr. Alverdian's wishes, his earthly remains were cremated, with his ashes scattered at sea. It continued, statesmen and stateswomen in the House of Representatives and Senate joined with mayors across Rhode Island in homage to a man whom they acknowledge as one of the most vocal, outspoken and constructive advocates for reforming Rhode Island's DCYF and the childcare system, and a fighter in spirit but a peacemaker in practice for 2 decades. His name, when uttered in memoriam in the House and Senate chambers and city halls throughout the Ocean State, was a fitting tribute, as those were the spaces where Alverdian laboured as a warrior for those without a voice for 2 decades, commenting on not just issues surrounding the Department of Children, Youth and Families, but also business, health, public safety and education. Clearly, most of this is bullshit. Nicholas Rossi has spent 2 decades raping and victimising women across the United States. Unfortunately, part of this last statement is true. Rossi's passing was acknowledged on the House floor, and he was praised for his contributions to childcare reforms. I'm still unclear how it seems politicians he interacted with knew nothing of his history. Louise called various agencies and organisations in Providence in order to organise memorials for her dear departed husband. Many of these phone calls were actually recorded. Sir Nicholas Rossi was apparently dead. This was such a piss-poor attempt of faking his own death. It was seen through immediately by multiple people. Nicholas Rossi couldn't get out of his own way. Someone, using the same login details for Rossi, was editing his Wikipedia page in late 2020, long after his purported death, removing anything negative about him. Checks were undertaken in Ireland, where Rossi was meant to have died, but there was no record of his passing. The Providence Journal investigated the death of Rossi, and in early 2021, they received what they described as an incoherent and rambling 9-page email, apparently from his widow Louise, criticising his sexual assault victim, Mary Grabinski, the police, and the judge. This was clearly written by Rossi and showed his obsession with this incident and his pathological grievance towards Mary, as she had dared to report him to the authorities. People who read the obituary, who knew Rossi, were convinced that he'd written it himself. It was around this time that the warrant was issued for his arrest in Utah for the rape of Kate on September the 13th, 2008, in the city of Orem, after his DNA was found to be a match. Ohio were also after him for failure to abide by the terms of his sex offender registration. The FBI were less than convinced about Rossi's supposed death. They spoke to his attorney, who said that he moved to Ireland, but when they spoke to others, they found that he told people he'd relocated to Canada, Germany and Switzerland. The intricacies of the FBI investigation have not been revealed, but they knew that Nicholas Rossi was not dead, and they, at the very least, were aware of his general location. This is likely because they were able to trace him electronically whilst he carried on scamming people online to fund his lifestyle. They knew that he'd moved to Scotland in May 2021 and were coordinating with Police Scotland to track down and apprehend this very dangerous man. During this month, Nicholas Rossi, or Arthur Knight as he was calling himself, was living in a flat in the Woodlands area of Glasgow with Miranda. The reason for this relocation is unclear, but likely because he was trying to escape crimes he'd committed in Bristol or elsewhere in England. Arthur Knight was a well-known character in the area. He was a man who insisted on being noticed. A news article stated, quote, "He drank in local pubs, dressed in flamboyant clothing, and made out to friends and neighbours that he and his wife Miranda had led a lavish lifestyle but were now settling in the city to have a family. The article also said he had a perfect English accent and there was no trace of an American twang. He spoke as if he was an aristocrat. He showed me pictures of his big house in Bristol and the nice big cars out front. Knight has also said to have walked with a limp and used a walking stick whilst always being dressed immaculately in suits. This is the hilarious thing about Nicholas Rossi. His narcissism meant he had no ability to blend in. He would not degrade himself by pretending to be one of the riffraff. He had to be superior to everyone, and so he pretended to be an aristocrat, taking on the persona of a caricature of an Englishman in his dress, voice and demeanour. It may be a surprise to some of you, but most of us over here don't speak or dress like Arthur Knight. I think Rossi had seen Downton Abbey or The Crown one too many times. He would have stuck out like a sore thumb anywhere, especially in Glasgow. Due to overwhelming evidence that Nicholas Rossi was still alive, the FBI petitioned Interpol to issue a red notice, which they did, instructing police forces worldwide to arrest him so that he could be returned to the United States. Within the red notice were photos of Rossi and his distinctive tattoos to allow identification. The COVID pandemic would lead to Nicholas Rossi falling into the lap of authorities and bring to an end a 2-decade-long crime spree that had crossed continents and ruined countless lives, but he wouldn't go quietly. In October 2021, Nicholas Rossi contracted COVID and became extremely unwell. He was admitted to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital under the name Arthur Knight. He ended up in intensive care in a coma and on a ventilator for 18 days. Again, it's clear that he was being tracked by the authorities, and officers from Police Scotland attended the hospital and showed staff the red notice, which included pictures of Rossi's tattoos. It appears that Rossi had tattoos removed on his lower, but not his upper arms, and these were recognised by medical staff, who pointed them in the direction of Arthur Knight. When Nicholas Rossi woke up, he found police officers standing around his bed. I love to imagine his shock when he saw them. On December the 13th, 2021, Arthur Knight was arrested on suspicion of being Nicholas Rossi, who was wanted for rape in Utah. His fingerprints were taken, and those of Arthur Knight were found to be a perfect match to Nicholas Rossi. On December the 23rd, 2021, Knight appeared in court via video link from hospital and was granted bail. The prosecution indicated there was concerning information that Arthur Knight was planning to flee. The day after the bail hearing, he left the hospital despite being expected to be there for weeks, and he and Miranda holed themselves up in their flat. On January the 20th, 2022, Arthur Knight failed to attend a court appearance and was remanded into prison, but was re-released on bail in February 2022. During this bail hearing, he insisted on being referred to as Arthur Knight and claimed that he was not Nicholas Rossi. Each and every time he appeared, Arthur Knight was in a wheelchair, hooked up to an oxygen machine, neither of which he needed. National attention fell on this strange case, and Arthur Knight, always with Miranda by his side, was filmed attending each hearing and also gave a number of bizarre and frankly hilarious television interviews. I'll play some of these clips for you.
We were once a normal family, but thanks to the media, our lives have been interrupted. And we'd like privacy, and I would like to go back to being a normal husband. But I can't, because I can't breathe, I can't walk. People say that's an act. Let me try to stand up. Let me try to stand up. Exactly, exactly.
What do you say to someone who believes that you are Nicholas Alaverdi?
I am not, Andrea, I am not Nicholas Alaverdi, and I do not know how to make this clear.
What do you say to people who say these are crocodile tears? He's putting on a show. This is all an act.
Oh,
Andrea,
no,
that's a low blow. That's a right low blow.
sir. No problem, we can deal that once we're out. You might have to lift him over the line. Come forward a wee bit. Let's go on this way. Come on then. Stop, Mr. Rossi. I'm not confused. Your oxygen mask is not connected. So much for needing oxygen. There's no oxygen going into your mask.
Yes, I am trying to function without an abuser. Would all of you like to see a video of this woman, Jane McSorley, assaulting and abusing me in my own home in front of Craig Johnson? I need oxygen. I can't breathe. No, I'm not on any oxygen.
Someone, can you move your arm, please, so I can get to it?
This woman assaulted me in my own home. I have a video which I will provide for your evidence.
I did not assault you.
You did, and you insinuated that I was unfaithful to my wife with you. You insinuated that I was unfaithful to my wife with you.
Come on then, let's get stuff. Come on then.
That I was unfaithful to my wife with you, and it's all on video and audio recording. It's all on video and audio recording.
What's that, the court room?
The text messages with my wife, and you're not going to get away with it. Victory!
The court room, then we go.
Victory!
Stop the court room for you. Mr. Rossi!
Miranda, what do you think of this situation that, again, basically everybody here and the authorities in the United States say the person you're sitting next to is not who you say he is, and that he's a serial liar, someone who faked his death, and also a serial sex offender in the United States?
Well, I know my husband inside out. I've been with him a number of years now, and I think a husband and wife, you get to a very close level that you know everything about each other, and you know characteristics and how you act together. What I read about this Nicholas Rossi, whatever his name is that he from what I read, is he's done some pretty terrible things, and how he acts, and he seems to have done them over a number of years over his life, and he seems to do it consistently. So since my husband and I have been together, he has been a gentleman, he has been kind, you know, he doesn't show any characteristics which frighten me, make me feel uncomfortable. I'm a pretty strong woman, and, you know, I've been through, you know, different long-term relationships in my life, and I know what to look for. And I think when you make that decision to marry someone, you have to make sure that you know that person inside out. And the
after 3 comas.
Absolutely, after 3 comas too. And from what I read about this Nicholas Rossi, is that, you know, he has a history of, you know, sexual assaults and things like that around women. And I think, you know, if you have that type of tendency, you can't hide that. I think that comes up time and time again. And my husband has shown sort of no tendencies at all that has ever frightened me. So, you know, I know my husband very well. All I can say is to be in this situation is quite bizarre. That's all I can say. You know, I went from, in September, my husband catching COVID in hospital, 3 comas, which in itself has been so distressing, so traumatic.
5% chance of living.
Absolutely. And I could have almost have been a widow, you know, and that was told to me time and time again. And the sheer number of times that he went on a ventilator meant that his survival rate was just going down and down and down. So to come out of that and for my husband to be a COVID survivor, to then be met with this bizarre story, this international story, which is pretty crazy. We're just a normal couple, average couple with 2 dogs, you know, doing very normal things in our lives. And to be in this media storm is pretty horrendous. And to have press at your door, really scared to go out for a pint of milk, and you know, because of the press intrusion, it's been very, very hard. But together, we you know, we're going to fight it together, because you know, Arthur's my husband. I love him very much. And you know, he's not this person. There's no way.
And just finally, I know I asked you this before. You can't show me your bicep further up your arm.
Not at the moment, but and then at a later date, where I can email you photos or share them to you live if you're into that sort of thing.
What was that? I'm sorry.
I said I can email you photos later on, or I can show them to you live if you're into that sort of thing.
Okay, so you can't write. You can't. You're saying you're not going to roll up your sleeve to show me right now.
I'm saying I can show you live if you're into that sort of thing. Or I can email you photographs later. It's up to yourself.
Well, if you can do it now, sure.
Well, that would require undoing my oxygen mask, removing my blazer, my shirt.
That's it. And to be fair, like,
I will show you.
yeah, it would be extremely difficult because Arthur can't walk, and I literally have to lift him up. So it's very difficult because he can't wait, he can't loop there on his feet.
Over the next 18 months, Arthur Knight tried every trick in the book to delay proceedings, including not turning up and having himself readmitted to hospital due to ill health. Again, luckily, he was his own worst enemy. On one occasion, when told that he would be discharged, he ran at hospital staff and tried to attack them, contradicting his pathetic claims in court that he was too ill to walk unaided. Doctors said there was nothing wrong with his lungs, and he didn't need to wear an oxygen mask, as shown by the fact that during one trip to court, his oxygen tank detached and rolled off down the road, but Knight appeared not to notice. In amongst this pantomime, over in Utah, Laura, who Rossi had raped in November or December 2008 in Salt Lake City, had reported her attack to the police, as now he was wanted for 2 serious sexual attacks against 2 women. The court quickly got sick of Arthur Knight, and in July 2022, 6 months after his initial arrest, his bail was revoked. He was remanded into HMP Edinburgh, where he continued to destroy his own story. Here he was aggressive, kicking doors and trying to attack staff, showing no indication of any physical disability. As his delaying tactics failed, Arthur Knight's demeanour changed. He was no longer as jovial when he was wheeled into court, now handcuffed to prison staff. His statements in court were ridiculous. He claimed, and brace yourself for this, they didn't have tattoos before his coma, and that he must have been tattooed whilst he was in hospital. Also, his fingerprints were apparently taken by employees at the hospital, passed to a corrupt member of law enforcement in Utah, who then passed this to Interpol, who changed the fingerprints of Rossi on file to match his. In terms of his DNA matching that of Rossi, Knight claimed this had also been doctored to make him seem like a guilty man. Miranda Knight also gave evidence in court, recounting her bullshit story that her husband was Arthur Knight, an Irish-born orphan who had, to the best of her knowledge, never been to the United States. On the 2nd of August 2023, a ruling was made in Edinburgh Sheriff's Court that Arthur Knight was in fact Nicholas Rossi and that he should be extradited to the US. Here is part of that ruling.
Of course, to deny that he's Nicholas Rossi, the man who's the subject of the extradition requests, who we know was born in the USA and is a US citizen, affidavit of Ms Johnson at paragraph 34, and who the court has already found him to be. And he continues to maintain that he's an Irishman, adopted at birth, long resident in the United Kingdom, and who has never set foot in the United States. He has, with medical professionals and in court, avoided questions about his childhood and upbringing. I conclude because that is a canvas on which he has not yet chosen to paint. although he has asserted various psychiatric ailments which ultimately could not be established without the history that he has chosen not to share. I conclude that he is as dishonest and deceitful as he is evasive and manipulative. Those unfortunate facets of his character have undoubtedly complicated and extended what is ultimately a straightforward case.
This was appealed up to the highest court in Scotland, but they reaffirmed the ruling, and on the 5th of January 2024, Nicholas Rossi, aka Arthur Knight, was flown out of the UK to Utah to face justice. Nicholas Rossi faces two separate sets of court proceedings, one in Salt Lake County and the other in Utah County. Legal proceedings in Utah County began on January the 16th, 2024, and you can see how this first court appearance went.
Number 36, State versus Rossi, 6768. Are you Mr. Rossi? Are you Mr. Rossi?
No, lady. You might have to take that off just to talk so she can hear you.
Is that a yes? I'm having a hard time.
My name is Arthur Knight, right?
I think I'm going to have the jail restate what he said. Having a really hard time hearing him.
What is it?
My name is Arthur Knight, right?
He says his name is Arthur Knight.
Brown.
Brown?
Arthur Knight, Brown.
I can't hear. You want to have him state his name and date of birth?
Yeah, we can't hear him at all. Can you ask him, can you please state your name and date of birth?
You get a little closer.
Lady, my name is Arthur Knight Brown. My date of birth is 22nd of the 11th, 1986.
Okay,
I think we're having a problem with understanding who this person is.
This is not number 36.
Your Honor, we've got him as Nicholas Rossi, but he's saying his name is Arthur Knight Brown.
Oh, that's one of the AKAs, it looks like.
What's your birthday?
We're having a really Is it July 11th, 1987?
No, my lady, it's 22nd of November, 1986.
22nd of November, 1986.
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, Tamara Vasquez for the state. This individual has been extradited, and he has not admitted his name or birth date accurately, and so I don't think we're going to be successful on that today either. It's also known as.
Objection, my lady. That is complete hearsay, and I would ask your ladyship that the prosecution show cause for why they proceeded to allow.
So, Mr. Knight, I'm going to,
whilst I had an appeal pending in the Supreme Court.
Mr. Knight, I'm going to appoint a lawyer for you. There's a no bail warrant in this case, so we're going to set it for a detention hearing in 10 days. And I'm also ordering that you not have any contact.
And if we can have the alleged victim's name protected.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, how is he supposed to know who not to have any contact with?
We're going to have to get the no contact order form given to him personally.
Okay. All right. So I am ordering that you not have any contact with the person who's going to remain confidential until you get a copy of the no contact order. So hopefully that makes sense. And when you get the order, you can see who it is. I'm also ordering that you be given a copy of your charge. It is a first-degree felony from November 1st, 2008.
Yes.
From November 1st, 2008. So you'll get a copy of that. Your next hearing will be in front of Judge Lawrence. January 26th, 1 o'clock, Judge Lawrence, and that will be a detention hearing.
Your Honor, before we go, would the court ask the bailiff if defendant has been fingerprinted and photographed as part of being booked under this OTN number?
I'm not sure, but if the court will, send notification to our records department, they can follow up and make sure it's been done.
Okay, I will make that order. I
Lady,
am ordering that he be fingerprinted and photographed.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Knight, we're finished.
I have an attorney, Lance Bastian.
Okay, well, your attorney can show up at the next hearing, and then we'll vacate the appointment of a legal defender.
We haven't been notified of any hearing.
Look, Judge, we'll give him the information. He can relay it to his attorney about the next hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Have a good day.
Bye. Next is number 24, State versus Markley.
Rossi then refused to attend a court hearing a week later. The judge warned that reasonable force would be used to ensure his attendance at the next hearing on the 6th of February 2024. Since then, he is engaged in each hearing. Well, to an extent, he has clearly reverted back to his almost pantomime character that's left people baffled given the weight of evidence against him, proving that he is Nicholas Rossi and not Arthur Knight with his appalling English accent. Eventually, the wheels of justice rolled on, and on the 14th of May 2024, Rossi decided to represent himself in one of his rape trials, despite warnings from the judge, as shown by this news report.
Alaverdian again claimed in court today in Utah his name is Arthur Knight Brown. The judge asked him repeatedly if he indeed wanted to represent himself in the case, strongly urged against it, calling it unwise.
I feel that I would be best to do that, not only because I've been living this horror for the past 2 years, but also because I want to get out of jail.
And is that still what you want to do?
It's not ideal, but it is what is necessary.
It's not what's necessary. All you need to do is ask for a lawyer today, and I can appoint one to represent you.
He could have gotten a lawyer for free, but he decided not to. When cautioned he'd be representing himself in a case that could send him to prison for life, Alaverdian said he's willing to take that risk. He told the judge he has studied some law in England. The judge then asked him to attest to that under oath, and he did. Alaverdian also said he'd study up in the jail library on Utah's laws. The next hearing there is June 11th. I'm Brian Crandall, NBC 10 News.
I wanted to wait until the sentencing hearing happened before making the video, but I'll likely be old and infirm when that rolls around, as I have no doubt, as I talk about in a moment, he will delay, potentially for years to come. But this is definitely a case to keep an eye on, as the story of Nicholas Rossi is far from over, and I imagine there'll be many more twists and turns before the final chapter is written. In this section, I'll focus mainly on Nicholas Rossi. We'll also talk about Miranda Knight, as she is, in some respects, just as interesting a character as the main focus of this video. At the beginning of the video, I referred to Nicholas Rossi as pure an example of a narcissist as I've ever covered on this channel. I stand by that statement. This is not a clinical term, but I couldn't think of a better way to encapsulate just how self-absorbed this man is. Even the worst people I've covered on this channel appear to have some periods of relative normality in their lives between crimes, but in the case of Nicholas Rossi, it appears that every second of every day and every breath was solely focused on getting attention, as well as controlling and manipulating others in order to get what he wanted. In order to truly understand Rossi, we need to look at the facade and what was actually behind this projection that he was so desperate to present to the world. So starting with what was truly behind the mask, as I've stated before, narcissism and associated behaviour is most commonly a reflection of insecurity and self-loathing. It's a shell that the sufferer has created in order to move away from how they truly feel about themselves. I believe that you can use the extent of someone's narcissism as a gauge of the depths of their actual despair. In the case of Rossi, there was such a deep dark hole inside of him that he was never able to fill it. Everything begins with his childhood. Jack, his father, was clearly a monster, abusing his mother Diana and potentially killing a family pet in front of the children. He was also a con man. The impacts of Jack's behaviour on the children can be shown by how Rossi, essentially became a carbon copy of his father. Jack taught his son that women were there to abuse, you get what you want through violence, and that others were only in the world for you to con. There were clearly no boundaries in the home, and the children began displaying violent and aggressive behaviour from a very young age. Rossi was never taught compassion or empathy, and therefore he has no remorse for anything he's ever done in his life. However, underneath all of this was a very traumatised and likely lonely child who felt no one cared about him. Although Jack was clearly an absolute bastard, he was the only father Rossi had, and him coming in and out of his son's life would have likely made him feel unloved, unwanted, unimportant, and unnoticed. I think early on, Nicholas Rossi resolved to never feel this way again, and in order to get as far away from how he felt as possible, he determined to be rich and in a position of authority. Everyone would have to pay attention to him, and then as the years progressed, he convinced himself he was entitled to these things, that he was superior to everyone else, his way of building a protective shell around his fragile ego by convincing himself of the opposite of how he truly felt. This is why he ingratiated himself into the Rhode Island House of Representatives. He wanted to be associated with the political elite, for his name to be spread far and wide, and for committees to be hanging on his every word. But he also needed money. He needed money to wear the finest suits, to eat at the most expensive restaurants, and so, like his father taught him, he borrowed and extorted money from representatives. Manipulating those who likely went to Ivy League colleges and came from money would have bolstered his feelings of superiority. Here he was, a poor kid from Providence, getting one over on the elite. However, all of this was for one goal, and the most important feature of Nicholas Rossi. He did it so people would notice him. He is pathologically incapable of not being the centre of attention. In Rossi's mind, if no one is talking about you, then you don't exist, and he cannot handle this. It reminds him how he felt as a child, and so everywhere he went, he made sure that people were interacting with him or talking about him. Moving forward to his pathetic attempt to fake his own death, this need for attention and adoration bleeds into his whole plan and is the reason why it was doomed to fail. Rossi is unable to get out of his own way. He couldn't help but write some obnoxious obituary, which was clearly a red flag, and edit his Wikipedia page after his supposed death to make himself sound as important as possible and delete anything critical. When he was actually on the run, rather than blending in and keeping his head down, making himself just a face in a sea of millions, he created this pantomime character of Arthur Knight and made sure everyone knew him, this caricature of an English gentleman who stood out like a sore thumb, and that was the point. Yes, he wanted to escape the law, but he also needed to be noticed. This is why he would have always been caught. He couldn't help himself. When he was caught, Nicholas Rossi was in his element. People were paying attention to him. Yes, he drew everything out to avoid being taken back to the US to face justice, but more importantly, so as many people as possible noticed him. He had a grin plastered on his face on many occasions, loving the attention. Him being in a wheelchair and wearing an oxygen mask was all about attention, making people feel sorry for him. When he felt this was waning, he would add something else. At one point, he was pictured wearing a yarmulke, claiming that he converted to Judaism whilst in prison. This was just so people would ask questions and be interested in him again. Showing that everything about this period of time was about attention is the fact there were several occasions where Arthur Knight called press conferences in his home to reveal bombshell evidence, and when no one showed up, he was indignant. He knew he was caught red-handed, but what was he going to do? Admit he was who everyone thought him to be? Of course not. If Rossi dropped the facade, then he would just become boring, another run-of-the-mill criminal, and his court proceedings would likely not even make the papers. He couldn't handle that. That's why he'll never admit to who he is. Arthur Knight will attend each and every court appearance in the US for years to come, just to keep this show going. I could have predicted that he would have eventually ended up representing himself. This is, in part, him showing off his intellect, but more importantly, there's no way that he would let a defense attorney take the spotlight from him. The attention has to be all his, and he will delay this case for as long as possible to draw this out. He knows when he's eventually convicted, he will disappear from the public consciousness and will just be another prisoner. He's terrified of this and will do whatever he has to do to delay the inevitable. Nicholas Rossi is far more fearful of being forgotten and being insignificant than a lifetime in prison. With regards to his behaviour towards women specifically, again much of this stems from his feelings of inadequacy. He's a typical domestic abuser, someone who believes that if he doesn't control his partners, they'll abandon him, because they may see that behind the layers of bullshit lies a deeply troubled man. And so, with each and every woman he came across, he sought to control them as soon as the relationship began, trying to turn them into an empty shell who would never question him or leave him. He felt entitled to treat these women any way he wanted. If they dared defy him, the punishment would be severe and often included rape. This was about getting sexual gratification, but it was also about asserting his dominance, showing these women that he owned them and would do whatever he wanted to their bodies. He could not stand even the slightest hint of rejection. Take the example of a woman who refused him sex after a date, a thing that is common. Instead of walking away, licking his wounds, and moving on, he forced her to take out money from an ATM and record some degrading video where she had to say that she was the abusive one and he needed the money for therapy. This example, as well as his obsession with trying to destroy the life of Mary Grabinski years after he sexually assaulted her, also demonstrates his utter contempt for women. He wanted to degrade and humiliate them, and this inevitably fed into his behaviour. Yes, he wanted to control his partners, but he also wanted to punish them for simply being female, a gender he clearly despised. If Nicholas Rossi could make dollar from these relationships, then great, but again, this was about filling the deep dark hole of emptiness inside of him. Again, he is one of those horrific men who I've covered time and time again on this channel, whose behaviour is based on a contradiction, where their dependence on being in a relationship, but utterly despise women, mean they move from coupling to coupling, horrifically brutalising each and every one of their partners. It's clear from the journals that Catherine Heckenden found during their brief marriage that he was stalking and tracking other women who he was planning to approach. I imagine there was almost no period of time, from his youth until his final arrest, that Nicholas Rossi was not in a relationship, likely several at any given time, to ensure that, if one woman left him, he would have others to fall back on. This means that I'm convinced that the 13 women I've covered in this video who he abused are just the tip of the iceberg of his true number of victims. He's an extremely dangerous man who thankfully will likely never walk the streets again. With regards to Miranda Knight, she is truly an enigma. She stood by her husband and parroted his lies to both the media and courts. However, what did she know? The answer to that is everything. When Rossi was apparently dying of cancer, the pair were living together, and when he supposedly died, there were phone calls made to organisations in Providence relaying this news to the media from his widow, who called herself Louise. Some of these calls were recorded, and a Scottish reporter who'd interviewed Miranda got her hands on them. When she heard Louise's voice, she knew it was Miranda. The voice recordings were also forensically examined by experts who determined that in all likelihood, Louise was Miranda, so she must have known that Arthur Knight was in fact Nicholas Rossi in order to make these calls. So she knew exactly who he was, therefore everything she said were lies, and everything she did was in order to help her husband escape justice. So is she a villain in this case? I considered the issue of Stockholm Syndrome, a victim forming a bond and eventually sympathising with her kidnapper or abuser, but rejected this. I think that Miranda Knight is another victim in this case. As to why I think that, look at Nicholas Rossi's behaviour with every woman he ever came across. Instantly, he began to abuse, control and dominate these women, raping and beating them, quickly placing them in a position where they were terrified of him. Thinking that he didn't act this way towards Miranda, I believe is extremely naive. He needed her to achieve an objective, to escape justice in the US, and so I imagine he pulled out all the stops to completely destroy who she was and turn her into basically a robot who would do as commanded. I imagine he brutalised this woman to achieve this as quickly as possible. Marrying her so quickly was a way of keeping his hooks in her so she couldn't escape him. But don't believe for a second that Rossi's disabled Arthur Knight performance carried on when the cameras were not rolling. I imagine he was striding around, threatening and raping Miranda, telling her the next stage of the plan, and that if she didn't do exactly what he said, he would kill her. Miranda apparently continues to support her husband, so why does she carry this on? I think the answer is likely because she fears there's a possibility he could get away with this. During the Scottish court case, they could have believed him, and with regards to the rape cases he faces now, they could be thrown out. If this happened, even though the likelihood is extremely small and he was released from prison, he would come after her. Or potentially she carries it on because he's threatened he will get someone to harm her from inside prison. I wouldn't put that past him. I don't think some level of emotional dependency on the relationship on the part of Miranda cannot be discounted, but I think ultimately she has been complicit in everything because she's been coerced into doing so. I would hope that any contact between them in prison, including phone calls and visits, are being strictly monitored to try and catch the abuse I suspect continues to this day. That way, others can step in and save her from the situation. I wouldn't be surprised if in years to come, Miranda Knight doesn't speak to the media and tell a very different story about her life with the monster that is Nicholas Rossi. So what's your thoughts on this case? I'm particularly interested in whether you think that Miranda knew that her husband was Nicholas Rossi, and if so, why she helped him avoid justice. If you like the content, then consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button. You can also send a one-off donation to support the channel using the thanks button. Please like, share, subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.